So, Sonic Advance. I first played this game on the GBA from like 2003, I think. Back then I was completely Sonic crazy, so of course would strive for any Sonic game my eyes came across. I really enjoyed my time with it, but it didn't really grab me in as much. I imagine this had to do with the fact that I played Sonic Advance 2 first, and an awful lot of that, so was mainly familiar with Sonic going really fast, but past me found Sonic Advance a tad too slow back then. However, it's been a long time since I last fully played Sonic Advance, so in 2023, decided to give it a revisit. 20 years later, I suddenly had the urge to play the Sonic Advance trilogy, and started by streaming Sonic Advance 1, capturing my full modern perspective and experience. I really wanted to see what my thoughts were on a game like this, having played more games, and so allow me to talk about my time revisiting Sonic Advance. Gotta be honest with you, Sonic Advance is pretty damn fun. It's essentially like a more up-to-date version of how the classic Mega Drive games were. The premise is the same, being get to the end of acts, defeat the boss at the end of each zone, and just pure platforming fun. Unlike Sonic 3 and Knuckles though, the zones don't link together through cutscenes, so the characters just suddenly appear in the next stage like Sonic 1 and 2, which isn't really a bad thing, but you can tell Sonic 3 and Knuckles had the better world building and atmosphere overall. In Advance, everything is just sort of there for some reason. This time around, you also get to play as 4 characters, those being Sonic, Tails, Knuckles, and for the first time in 2D, Amy Rose. Each character is available to play from the start too, so there's no need to unlock them as you play. Sadly, when I played this as a kid, I didn't really take the proper time to appreciate each of the characters, but noticed a lot of diversity between each one when revisiting. Sonic, Tails and Knuckles all have their Genesis style moves intact, except with a few extra ones thrown in. For instance, Sonic can perform a jump dash for extra airtime and a somersault attack, and Knuckles can perform a punch plus uppercut. As for Tails, the only additional move he gets is a tail swipe from Sonic Adventure. Much like in S3 and K, it's each character's main ability that add to the different feel of the characters through the stages. Sonic being the basic side of needing to be careful for platforming, Tails and his flying ability for reaching higher areas more easily, and Knuckles with his ability to glide and climb up walls to also reach higher areas. He also has a new ability wherein water surfaces to the top and stays afloat. A neat little detail to add and makes the boss in Ice Paradise even easier. To my surprise though, Amy Rose ended up being my favourite character to play as. While she doesn't have a traditional spin jump like the others, she jumps normally but can do a second attack in the air by swinging her Pico Pico hammer. This acts as an extended reach for enemies and bosses, so it can be pretty useful for an easier time. Some people find it slightly irritating that she can't just do a normal spin attack, but in my eyes, the secondary attack is technically one, but with a delay and more control. Just requires timing is all. While crouching, if you press B, she uses her hammer to do a higher leap, which is great for stuff you couldn't usually reach with a normal jump. A big discovery I noticed is that using her hammer attack on springs makes the altitude and spring power super high. This meant that in some levels I could hit a spring and give Amy that extra oomph in the air to skip certain sections. It's a damn fun thing they threw in, and I had a great time using this on each level, seeing what could be accessed or skipped. I can safely say that on future playthroughs of Sonic Advance, Amy will be my main now, as she is just so fun to experiment with for this one mechanic that changes the whole game. What really pops for me in Sonic Advance in terms of visuals is the art style and animation though. In each zone the colours and vibrancy really pop, with the playable characters being easy to see and standing out. I was honestly quite surprised to find that this level wasn't hard to see Sonic, considering that it was dark blue clashing with purple, but it worked well. I especially have to praise the level of detail in the sprites and animations too. They really went all out on these, adding so much emotion and emphasis on the characters. You can see how graceful each movement is, with different uses of frame rate to add to the weight and feel. At times the characters will be running in 60 frames per second, but when slow or idle, lower the frames to capture detail more fluently. The characters' celebration animations at the end of each level are also a nice touch, plus the idle animations. Every character when idle basically tells you to get a move on with the game, but they each have their own style for personality. Sonic being impatient and egging you on, Tails simply suggesting you should get a move on, Knuckles just waiting around, and Amy just shouting for your attention to get going. The only times where the sprite detail looks a tad strange is when going fast or round loops, as it results in a jaggy mess, but it happens so quick that it won't bother you too much. I am honestly shocked that we haven't had a revisit to this art style and approach, as even in 2023 I find this stunning. I personally would love a port of this game to a modern system, but with a widescreen perspective and such. Basically like the Sonic Origins treatment and its features for modern accessibility. Hopefully they will, but we'll just have to wait and see someday, I guess. If you're after a true challenge and proper ending in this game, then you will be trying to collect the famous Chaos Emeralds in special stages, like in the previous Sonic games. Finding the special stages act a little different this time round though, as instead of needing a certain amount of rings or even just finding a giant gold ring, you need to find a special spring on each zone. These are hidden quite well and require a lot of careful observation. If you're after an easier time, I'd recommend playing through as Tails, as his flight power can be useful for skimming around areas even if you fall. If you're struggling to find them, just take notes of each path you take until you've explored every part of the level. As tempting as it was to use a guide for the special spring locations, I managed to find them all without one by just repeated playthroughs. I will definitely point out the odd design choice in which acts the springs are available though. Unfortunately, there is no pattern or template for the springs, which really baffles me. The first one is located specifically in Act 1 of Neo Green Hill, which is fine, but in Secret Base, the other one is only in Act 2. Casino Paradises took me a long time to find too, with it being in Act 1 after all the attempts. And Ice Paradise's locations are just plain weird to me. Why? Because for some bloody reason there are springs in both Act 1 and Act 2. This is the only zone in the game that has special springs on 2 acts, and why that is, I honestly have no idea. I even went to look at the instruction manual for this game, but for the springs it simply says, jump on a special spring in each zone to enter a special stage. Well, that's useful, thanks, because I didn't already know that. If you played S3 and K, this really catches you off guard, as at least in that game, you have multiple giant rings to get to on each act, some even having like 8 in one, so you get given more chances. It adds to the replayability and reward for exploring the levels. But in Sonic Advance, you have to search the entire act from top to bottom for just one spring. I know that I had an easy time finding them in my stream, but to be honest, I think that was more due to luck. The actual placements for the springs are very random, and the worst part is you might spend all your time searching for one in one act, only to find it's in the other. Oh jeez, it puts me here. And then we're back here, are we? Yeah. Oh dear. I'm starting to worry if it's actually in the first one. let's go to the first one. What? Oh, I thought it was going to take me towards something. What the? Spring! It's honestly really dumb to me. Anyway, yeah, on to the special stages themselves. To me, the special stages in this game are just alright. They do the job. Your goal is to collect a certain amount of rings before reaching the end in 2 rounds to nab a Chaos Emerald. Kinda similar to Sonic the Hedgehog 2's special stages. Instead of running, the characters are put on a board surfing through the air, and trying to collect the rings is just fine. It's functional and doable, but at times I do find the depth perception to be a tad odd, as you are moving around in a 3D space with sprites, so at times you may crash or miss stuff due to the poor depth perspective. There are also these little flashy things where if you press B in time you get extra rings for performing the trick. The A button also speeds up your character and brings them to the centre, which is needed to sometimes slip through tight gaps, though you do need to do it very early as centering usually takes a while. If you're careful enough and net enough rings in 2 rounds, you will earn a Chaos Emerald. Unlike the Genesis games though, where you could grab the next emerald in the same zone, Advance makes each coloured emerald exclusive to the 7 zones. If that thought steers you away though, then worry not, as this game is extremely accessible for full completion. As soon as you clear Act 1 of Neo Green Hill with a character, the stage select screen becomes available, and so if you miss an emerald, you can easily just jump back in. Not to mention that for the special springs, you get a chance at them per life, meaning if you fail, you can always just make your character die and just jump right back in. Thankfully, Chaos Emeralds apply for all characters when collected, so it doesn't matter which character you clear a special stage with, thank God. And yeah, that's how the special stages are. To me, it definitely has its perks, but I personally would prefer it if they didn't go back to this style in the future games. I thought the old style in the Genesis games worked fine, especially in Sonic 3 and Knuckles. It was an attempt though, and when Sonic Mania came out they went for the old style, so there you go. For the endings in Sonic Advance, they aren't really too different, but certainly a nice touch. Upon defeating the final boss, your character will fall through the sky and be caught on a plane piloted by Sonic. If you beat the game as Sonic though, it's Tails flying the plane instead. A celebration is had with also some lovely GBA sprite drawings on display. Then of course the characters jump off and do their final pose to the camera in the traditional Genesis way. Credits roll and that's that. Like I say, nothing spectacular or unique, but it adds to the charm and nice for them to add it in. However, the proper ending is a little different. If you manage to collect all the Chaos Emeralds and also finished each character's journey, then if you re-defeat the final boss as Sonic, something else will happen. Sonic gives chase to Eggman, who ends up going to the bloody moon of all places, in which Sonic uses the power of the Chaos Emeralds and turns into the mighty god that is Super Sonic, thus flying off to the moon. Also, let me just say that I find Super Sonic's transformation a little bit meh. He just sort of jumps and boom, there he is. No sound effects, no build up, just... In the previous Sonic games, Super Sonic always had this hype transformation, so I do find the one in Advance a little jarring. Anyway, on to the final fight on the moon. So, we're at the final boss against a giant robot in a place called the Moon Zone, and I honestly find this fight a little crap. The reason why is because even though I am playing as the mighty Super Sonic, it definitely doesn't feel like it gameplay wise. Let me explain. Super Sonic's pose shows that he is hovering, yet for some reason rather than fly in the air around the place, he jumps. Now I'm aware that in Sonic 2 and 3 he also jumped as Super Sonic, but the difference is that his jump animation transitioned into the trademark spin attack. It felt more fluent in my book. On Sonic Advance he floats and jumps while floating. As for the fight itself, it's pretty easy. The robot just sort of throws everything at you, being lasers, rocks, explosions. It's difficult to not get hit in this fight, so I suppose Super Sonic made sense. You jump and dash into the robot's head a couple of times and then that's it. Yep, that's literally it. There are no multiple phases, no difficulty spikes, just a pretty boring boss in my opinion. After you defeated the final boss, you are greeted to this ending cutscene. Sonic's pals stare up from below, hoping that he's safe and sound, and after a couple of days pass, Tails sees that he is alright, and the game ends with Sonic staring at you. I must say, I find it hard to believe that he was gone for a couple of days in space though. I mean, rings deplete over time for Super Sonic, so how he's still super after all that, I honestly have no idea. But hey ho, and that is Sonic Advance everyone. After finally giving this game a revisit, I gotta say, it's pretty damn fun. Definitely not up there as much as the Genesis classics, but I still had a great time. Back then I said that the game felt too slow, but that was mainly due to having that fast experience with the sequel. Now that I've given it a proper look, it holds up well. The only parts of the game that were a tad annoying were the special spring placements and level design towards the end, but everything else worked well. Sadly, the only way to access this game without emulation is on the original GBA cartridge itself. There have been no re-releases, but it would be nice to see this on Switch Online, or perhaps even a widescreen remaster. I feel it does need to be ported in some way. Either way, it's been fun talking about this game, and I'm very curious for what's in store as I revisit Sonic Advance 2. That's going to be interesting. See you then, and thank you for listening to me ramble on about it.